Artillery didn't kill Private Miller. The ground swallowed him whole. At 4 a.m., his screaming suddenly stopped. We were stationed in Trench 4 on the edge of Hill 319. There were 30 of us left. It had been raining for 40 consecutive days. We had not seen the sun in over a month. The mud was knee-deep. It was a thick, black, putrid sludge. It smelled of rotting wood, rusted metal, and something sweeter. Something biological that shouldn't be there. We were completely cut off. Command stopped responding to our radio distress calls 2 days ago. Their last order was simple: hold the line at all costs. But there is no enemy charging us across no man's land. The enemy is underneath our boots. When we ran to Miller's guard post, he was gone. But there was no artillery crater. There were no footprints leading away into the fog. There was just the flat, dark mud. And laying perfectly still on the surface was his heavy iron helmet. At first, the lieutenant told us Miller deserted. He told us Miller cracked under the psychological pressure of the eternal rain and ran into the forest. We all wanted to believe him. It was easier to believe in cowardice than to face the impossible truth of what was happening beneath us. But then we found Miller's rifle. It was sticking straight up out of the deep mud, perfectly vertical. Like a tombstone. Sergeant Hayes grabbed the wooden stock of the heavy weapon and tried to pull it out. He couldn't. The mud did not act like wet dirt. It resisted. When Hayes pulled harder, we heard a sickening sound. It sounded like thick tendons tearing. Like flesh ripping apart deep underground. Hayes let go, pale and shaking. The rifle slowly sank back down into the black sludge, inch by inch, until it disappeared completely. The mud bubbled, releasing a foul, hot gas into the freezing rain. That was the exact moment we realized Trench 4 was not a defensive position. It was a stomach. It happened again 4 hours later with Corporal Davis. Davis was exhausted. He had been awake for 3 days straight. He sat down on a broken wooden ammunition crate, leaning his heavy head against the dirt wall of the trench. I turned my head to light a wet cigarette. It took me maybe 20 seconds. When I looked back, his legs were completely gone. The thick, dark clay had risen over his knees in absolute, terrifying silence. Davis woke up instantly. He thrashed violently, screaming for help, his voice cracking with pure animal panic. 3 men rushed over. We grabbed his arms and we pulled with everything we had. But the earth did not want to let go. The mud didn't just hold him. It actively pulled back. It acted like muscle. The more we struggled, the tighter it gripped his flesh. The pressure was so immense we could hear the bones in his legs cracking under the surface. He didn't just sink. He was being dragged down. Like a massive, invisible creature was reeling him in from the deep earth. He screamed my name. He begged me to shoot him. Before I could unholster my sidearm, the mud pulled him violently downward. In 3 seconds he was gone. The dark water filled the hole. And then the trench was silent again. Only the sound of the eternal freezing rain hitting the puddles. By sunrise, only his helmet floated on the surface of the putrid water. We finally understood the horrifying rules of this place. The mud is alive. And it only hunts the still. If you keep moving, it cannot grasp you. If you keep walking back and forth, dragging your frozen boots through the sludge, you stay alive. But the human body has limits. The human body requires rest. And here in Trench 4, sleep is an immediate death sentence. There were 28 of us left. We began marching, pacing back and forth in the narrow, flooded corridor of the earth. Left, right. We looked like a line of exhausted ghosts haunting a graveyard. No one spoke. We just listened to the squelch of our own boots, terrified that the mud would suddenly feel too thick. By the 3rd day of forced walking, hallucinations began. Private Evans swore he saw faces pressing out of the mud walls. He said the earth was breathing. I thought he was losing his mind to sleep deprivation, until I saw it myself. The walls of the trench were expanding and contracting. Very slowly, very subtly, like the chest of a massive, sleeping beast. When you stood close to the dirt wall, you could feel a faint, rhythmic vibration. A heartbeat buried deep within the hill. We were not fighting a war anymore. We were antibodies trying to survive inside a massive, ancient digestive system. We tried to dig our way out. We thought if we could carve a staircase up the side of the trench, we could escape into no man's land and take our chances with the enemy snipers. Anything was better than being eaten alive by the dirt. Sergeant Hayes took the heaviest entrenching shovel we had. He raised it high above his head and brought the sharp steel edge down violently into the sloped wall of the trench. The shovel struck deep, but it didn't hit rocks or roots. It hit something soft, something thick. When Hayes pulled the shovel out, dark, thick red fluid began to pour from the gash in the mud. It wasn't muddy water. It was warm. It smelled of copper and rusted iron. The earth was bleeding. Hayes dropped the shovel in absolute horror. The trench immediately responded. The ground under his feet violently shifted, turning from solid clay into a deep, freezing liquid. Before he could scream, he sank to his waist. He fired his rifle blindly into the mud walls, emptying the magazine in sheer desperate madness. The bullets impacted the dirt with wet thuds. The trench wall rippled in response, like skin flinching from a wasp's sting. Then the mud surged forward. It rolled entirely over Sergeant Hayes, burying him alive mid-scream. The bleeding hole in the wall slowly closed itself, leaving no trace he ever existed. 27 men left. We couldn't dig. We could only walk. Days blurred into an endless nightmare of freezing rain and heavy footsteps. My muscles screamed in agony. My eyes burned. The urge to just lie down in the freezing water and close my eyes was overwhelming. Death felt so much kinder than the exhaustion. One by one the men failed. Some simply collapsed from fatigue, their bodies hitting the mud with a heavy splash. They were gone before we could even reach them. The earth took them in seconds. Others went completely insane. Private Jenkins started talking to the mud, whispering secrets to the walls, before willingly walking perfectly still, allowing the clay to swallow his boots, then his knees, then his waist. He smiled as he went under. He said it was warm down there. By the 7th day of the march, there were only 4 of us left. We were no longer soldiers. We were hollow shells made of shivering flesh and mud. We linked our arms together to keep each other from falling. If one man stumbled, the other 3 pulled him up. We walked in a continuous, agonizing circle. A dance of the damned. Then the greatest terror of all finally happened. The rain stopped. For 40 days the rain had been our curse. But without the rain, the mud began to change. A freezing, biting wind swept through the trench. The temperature plummeted below zero. The thick, biological sludge that we had been marching through began to harden. It started at our boots. Every step became heavier. The mud was drying into a thick, concrete-like crust around our ankles. We couldn't march anymore. We had to physically rip our boots from the earth with every single step. Private Collins was the first to get stuck. His right boot froze solid in the hardening clay. We tried to pull him free, but the earth had him. As the wind blew, the mud around his other leg rapidly dried and solidified. He was cemented in place. He didn't sink. The mud wasn't liquid anymore. It was petrifying him. It was trapping him on the surface like an insect caught in tree sap. His screams echoed in the freezing, clear night air. We had to leave him. We had to keep moving our legs, forcing our knees high, shattering the drying crust of dirt with every agonizing step. Now I am the only one left. I am writing this in my small leather journal. My hands are too frozen to properly hold the pencil. I am leaning against the wooden support beam of the bunker. I can't lift my legs anymore. The mud has hardened perfectly around my calves. Feels like iron casts bolted to my bones. I am entirely trapped. The trench is utterly silent. The sky above is clear and filled with uncaring, bright stars. I can feel the subtle vibration through the hardened clay against my skin. The slow, rhythmic heartbeat of the hill. It is waiting for me to fall asleep. It is waiting for my body to give up. I can feel my eyelids getting heavier. The exhaustion is heavier than the mud. I know what happens when I close my eyes. But I can't fight it anymore. If anyone finds this journal, do not send a rescue team to Hill 319. Burn it from the air. Burn the earth. Let the fire turn this mud into glass. I'm so tired. The mud is so warm. I think I'll just rest my eyes. For 60 seconds. Just 60 seconds. A Warbound Journal story.